Yeah, it's your boy Ray on the mic. Let's go.
I just gotta get this off my chest here. Centering someone's identity doesn't mean that you are excluded. We're in a season right now of June where there's so many celebrations happening that are geared towards those marginalized or historically excluded identities, such as Juneteenth for Black Americans and Pride for those LGBTQIA plus community members. And these elements and these specific types of events and celebrations are geared towards those identities that have been marginalized, that have been excluded by law, that have been ostracized or even penalized to the point of death because of him showing up in a particular way that is against societal norms of heteronormative, cisgendered white male, right? The identities that we share in our world and our society are our identities for a reason. And there's things that we hold near to our hearts. And oftentimes we don't feel like we have the ability to show up in certain spaces because of fear of being ostracized, fear of being oppressed, fear of being put down because of who we are, and we can't be our true authentic selves. So now, we've entered in 2023 and there's so many opportunities in the last century, right? Where identities are showing up and creating spaces that are geared towards celebrating who they are. And by doing so, it's more so just centering that identity in a world that hasn't centered them before. What's been fascinating is watching comments and watching people's hearts that aren't tied to that particular identity feel like it's an exclusionary act. For example, I was working on a message board of an organization that was highlighting an event geared towards Black professionals, right? And this event was helping Black professionals feel resiliency, feel self-care, have tips and tools to navigate this world that isn't created or hasn't been set up for them, right? Or a workplace that hasn't been set up for them. And on this message board, there were a few comments that were saying, hey, this is great. Allyship, supporting those who are identified this way to get the support that they need. And then there was comments were showing, how does this promote inclusion, right? Like as if it was a negative thing for a people group, these Black professionals, to gather together and just to talk about their experiences in a way or in a space that is tied or directly geared towards them. It gets me thinking about this quote: when you are accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. The world has been set up to work by design in a particular way. And identities that do not show up in that way are changing the narrative by creating centering spaces geared towards their identities. And because that's threatening to those that have had access to the whole world, they feel some type of way, right? White folks feel some type of way if there's a space centered towards Black people. Heterosexual individuals feel some type of way if a certain space is geared towards LGBTQIA plus communities. This is something that is common threat. But what I want to challenge here is that if you feel like having these spaces and places centered towards an identity that's different than yours a threat to you and your identity, I want you to take a step back and process why. Why do you feel threatened? Why do you feel like there's a need for a people group to have their own communities, their own spaces? And what led us to this particular point in history for that to be an occurrence? And then while you're exploring that, then you can explore your own identity. What would it look like for you to show up in this space? Or what would it look like for you and your identity, your community, to be that inclusive space, so we can break down those barriers of having and recentering events, activities, cultures, communities, to orient ourselves to identities that haven't been showing up in that space before. While you see these events occurring around you, you see marginalized identities having their own spaces and centering events geared towards their identities, I want to challenge you to not only process this for yourself, but then also challenge nothing needs to be said. Like if you need to say something, because what good would that do by you speaking up on a message board saying that this is not an exclusion practice, right? Like, what if you just transition that perspective into a curiosity to understand why, and then find a friend to have a talk with them to say, what is it about this space that does not invite inclusivity for you? What can we do to center you in this space? So a little bit of a Ray's rant, but wanted to rant away about how it will look for us to really take a hard look and challenge the narratives of the spaces that we're a part of, celebrate the fact that we are seeing more and more identities come together, highlight the intersectionalities of our identities, but then also not to take away from the opportunity for people to find places where they can belong and not have to break down those barriers or not have to insert ourselves into these spaces to have it look the way that we want it to look if we are the dominant culture, and rather open our hands up and ask them to say, how can we support you in centering the space for you? And what do you need from us to be supportive in that way? All right. Ponder on that if you will.